and welcome back to RPMbassy. Today we're looking at a British band who many people will recognise the name of, and it's their debut album. This is Take to the Skies by Enter Shikari. So this is 25th of March 2007, this album came out. It's kind of a compilation of a lot of their earlier stuff. So they've been going for like sort of 3 or 4 years at this stage when this album came out. They'd had a bunch of different EPs and things out, and certainly some of the biggest songs on this album had been previously released on EPs. This, despite it having sort of like some older songs, you know, I think it's a perfect sort of combination where they'd managed to build up this sort of like, you know, good level of support while still staying indie. This is released essentially on an indie label, their own label, Ambush Reality. But they had that kind of groundswell of support, which meant that when the album came out, it actually got to number 4 in the UK album charts, which, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe is kind of like the first of its kind to do such a thing where, you know, essentially an indie album manages to get that high in the charts. So yeah, a really like stellar sort of way to come out of the gate, all guns blazing. And yeah, this is a really great like statement of a debut album. It really does kind of announce their arrival in a great way, sort of into the mainstream almost. And they weren't necessarily a band that I was super keen on at the time, but like now, like, you know, some like nearly 20 years later, this is an album I do go back to very often. And certainly, you know, there are tracks on here which I think are iconic within the scene. And I think as well, this is kind of an album that is... it's evocative of an era, not only because of, you know, the kind of genre and the sort of the style that they were doing, that sort of crossover of post-hardcore, melodic metalcore, that kind of thing, but also the way it sounds in terms of production and things like that. You know, these days when I think of metalcore, I sort of think of bands where they've essentially... they've engineered it to within an inch of its life. You know, it's so pristine, it's so quantized, and there's none of that. Like, it, you know, it doesn't feel loose or anything, but it feels very energetic, and there's a lot of like real life movement to it, and it really does feel like 4 guys who are playing in a room together, but really at the top of their game. And you know, there's something very special about that, especially with this album. With this version in particular, this is the 2015 repressing. So it had a pressing at the time when it first came out, and then it had a 2013 pressing, I want to say, that was sort of limited to sort of 300 or so copies. And that was sort of done as a way to kind of bring prices down for fans, because the original was so expensive online. And then this one came out in 2015. This particular version is unique in that I believe it's the only vinyl pressing that they've done of this album that doesn't also come with the CD, or certainly at the time it was the only pressing of the album that didn't come with the CD. So this is just pure vinyl, double LP, nothing else. And in fact, it is quite bare bones. There's no sort of notes or anything in here. You do get quite a cool centerfold there with the band, and I do enjoy sort of the art. Again, it's quite indicative of that sort of era. It's drawn by Keaton Henson, which I believe he's done a few different bits and pieces within this sort of genre of that time. I think he might have had a hand in a couple of Rollo Tomasi's album covers. Certainly Dananana Aykroyd, I think I've said that right. He did one of their albums. So yeah, like I said, it's a real kind of iconic sort of example of that era. You know, not just the sound, but the art and everything. The albums themselves are on a nice clear, little bit sort of like cloudy almost. It's kind of got a few waves and bits and pieces in there. It sounds fantastic. The only downside I would say to this is, and it's something that I've encountered a lot more, obviously, with modern albums. But it does seem to be like particular labels or particular bands seem to be more guilty of it, is the punch in the middle never seems to be quite big enough. So you kind of have to sort of put it on and off your turntable a few times for it to actually get going. Now, as for songs on here, there's 17 tracks, but a few of them aren't actually labelled, and this is quite true to the original release, not necessarily more modern releases. If you've seen it on streaming, you'll see that all of the songs are titled, namely the first and the last tracks that don't have a title on here are titled on streaming. Track 1 is commonly known as Stand Your Ground, this is Ancient Land, and the final track is commonly known as Closing. Tracks in the middle are usually called Interlude, like 1, 2, 3 and 4. But on here you have just got the main track titles and then everything else is left blank. I quite like the first track having the title, the Stand Your Ground, because that's a lyric of track 2, which is sort of a self-titled track, Enter Shikari. And the other ones, Interlude, it could either be there or not be there in terms of the track titling, it doesn't matter. They are great interludes though, and that's something that I really do want to mention with this album, is the way it flows. Like, there's a really great sort of order to the tracks. The way it's been organised is phenomenal, and I think those interludes have really been sort of carefully thought out. Like, any track that didn't make sense to follow another, that's where they put the interludes to make sure that it felt like a proper shift from one to the other. And so you get these great little intros, which if you've ever seen like a live version of Sorry You're Not a Winner, which is, you know, one of their biggest tracks, the live intro that they often use is kind of the sort of interlude on this album. And for me, that's sort of an essential listen. If I'm listening to Sorry You're Not a Winner, I need to hear that interlude as part of it as well. You know, they are part and parcel. But yeah, like, as I said, the order on here is really, really phenomenal. Like, Enter Shikari, Mothership, Anything Can Happen in the Next Half Hour. Those three songs, essentially, like, they blend together so well. It almost feels like some kind of like prog epic in a way, the way they kind of like, they just so perfectly like goes from one to the next. Other great tracks on here, you've got No Sweat with 3 S's. That's like a really good heavy track, and it's kind of got that really sort of metalcore, like post late stage emo vibe, which I really love. And yeah, of course, Sorry You're Not a Winner. Like, there's such a level of fun on that. You know, it's not taking itself super seriously, and like Raul's lyricism, the way that he writes lyrics, it always feels like he sounds very true to himself, and there's no kind of like airs and graces, and he's not like putting on an act. It always feels like he's going out there specifically because like he either wants to have fun or he really wants to talk about something. And certainly later albums it gets a lot more serious, but this, you know, certainly still does have some serious topics on here. Other great stuff, Johnny Sniper and a Jew. Johnny Sniper, I think, is kind of the most 2007 sounding song on here. You know, it really does kind of sound exactly like that era. All of the Korg micro Korg on there, like this, that synth is kind of, that really is kind of a titan of that era. You've got the Korg Electribe as well, which is like plastered all over here in terms of like the sampled bits and pieces. So yeah, sound wise, it's the right balance of nostalgia mixed with like a really good like set of songs, like really well written songs, really good engineering, but also engineering and production that has the respect to not kind of cut songs up and make them sound so pristine and clean that they lose all life. It really is like a perfect kind of lightning in a bottle album for me. It flows perfectly, it sounds excellent, but it's also got that nostalgia. I think, you know, if you grew up around this era and you haven't listened to this band, or, you know, you perhaps at the time didn't like it and you've expanded your horizon since, I really do recommend going back and giving this a listen, because as I said, this was a band that took a while for me to sort of grow on, and now like I revisit this all the time, and you know, their newer stuff as well. Like I think they're a band that not only have they stayed the same in terms of their members lineup, they've managed to kind of keep evolving and keep doing new things while staying true to themselves in terms of sound and presentation. And yeah, like you cannot get more iconic than this for this kind of like mid 2000s kind of screamo emo post-hardcore stuff. Like I think this is the top as far as it goes. So if you haven't heard it, I do recommend checking it out. If you can get a copy of this, again, I really recommend it. They're not the cheapest thing, but you know, that's kind of the nature of it. You know, this was limited to 1,000 copies. The pressing before was limited to 300. Whether or not there's been other pressings, I'm not 100% sure. I'm sure there's probably just like a black vinyl pressing that was done sort of like maybe in the sort of 2020s. I imagine there's probably one of them out there. And if so, like that'll be dirt cheap, I reckon. But anything sort of like this one, the 2015 or before, you are looking generally at sort of 100 plus for a copy. But yeah, with it being such a great sort of flowing one to the next kind of album, it really does lend itself nicely to this. So if you can get hold of it, I highly recommend it.